Well, welcome to my presentation. Thank you very much for being here on time and earlier than that. So we're going to be talking about how to do migrations from non-Drupal systems to Drupal using a slightly different technique that I was able to use and perform on one of our big projects there at Pixel. So what you are about to see is a small demo of something that I've done on a bigger scale. So let's start. So a little bit about me. I am a Drupal developer. I've been developing for the web probably around since 2007. Not the entirety of those years have been Drupal. I've also been doing a little bit of mobile and very low-level applications too. Then came back to web and started doing Drupal. I've been doing Drupal for about 4 years, so I started in Drupal 7 and been doing Drupal 8 for the last year. Currently I work at Pixel, and I've been working there for a year too. So what are some issues that we might find when we want to migrate content from systems that are non-Drupal or legacy systems, especially when dealing with government? A lot of these issues might arise, right? So we have legacy systems that might be behind firewalls or VPNs. The architecture of the database might be very complex. We may not even have permission to access those databases or systems. Some of them might be very old. A lot of those systems are not even using a database. They are just like files, and they're rendering content through files, especially with technologies like, well, I'm not going to mention, but you know which ones. Very old technologies and stacks that it's very weird how they structure their data. And the content can be even separated in different places. Not everything is laid out on the very same database, but it can be distributed between different data centers, and it can be very complex. So these are some of the issues that you might encounter when you are doing migrations from legacy systems or other systems that are non-Drupal to Drupal. This is just a small sample of all the database technologies that you might encounter. So if you're not familiar with all of those, most of those are like SQL, but they're like different flavors, and they all have their own syntax and their own architecture. So it's very difficult for a developer to know or to be familiar with all of these, literally with most of those. I haven't even heard a lot of those that are there at that list, but those are very commonly used in proprietary systems or legacy systems that got built around 90s, 2000s. So it's one of the problems. So what we're going to see in this session is not a method that should be used or could be used in any situation. So there are some instances where a migration from a database might be better, might be faster, might make more sense, or a migration from CSV file might be better. So we kind of always have to be assessing the situation. In my experience, this method is very powerful, and it allows you for a lot of flexibility, as you are about to see on the small demo that I have prepared for you. So we are going to be using the Drupal 8 Migrate API. So even though it's still experimental, the module is under the experimental category. It is very powerful. You can do a lot with it as it is right now. There's a lot of work still being done to it, but it's very, very powerful right now. So all the migrations that we plan to do with this Migrate API have like 4 key components or elements. One of them is the ID of the migration. So all of our migrations should have an ID. We're going to see where is that set up. A source, a process, and a destination, which means the source is where the data is actually stored. the process is kind of like the mapping between the data that we have and our Drupal 8 fields. And also in the process, we can add like the data transformations that we might need to do for Drupal to be happy with, because we might encounter, and we're going to see an example of this. So, and the destination is where are we going to put all this information. So we're going to be getting it from somewhere. We're going to be doing something with that information during the process part, the process section, and then we're going to set all that into our final destination, which is usually like a Drupal entity in this case. And all this is a YAML-based application, so a YAML-based migration. So we currently, or we do not have like a UI to do migrations. However, I think the YAMLs, once that you get used to them, are very easy to read, and you can see clearly where all the sections are and how to configure them. There are a couple more modules that we should be aware of, and those, in my experience, these are like needed right now. One of them is Migrate Plus. So what Migrate Plus does is it adds support for migration groups, more source, process, and destination plugins that are also very important during migration. And it has also a submodule with examples of how to perform migration. So it's a very useful module as well. And Migrate Tools, which provides the Drush commands to actually perform the migration. And we are going to see how to execute them during the demo. So some of them are the migrate status, import, rollback stuff, and there are a few others that we can do to reset migrations. Those are documented on the Drush help too. So let's start talking a little bit about source plugins. So our source plugin, what it's going to be doing is just try to understand the technology behind our source where our data is. So right now, the most common ones would be like an SQL source. We could have also an URL source that is what we are going to be using today in this session. The URL source also support parsers, so we can parse through JSON, XML, and SOAP out of the box. And there's another one, which is another module that we can install too, which is called the Migrate Source CSV, and this provides a plugin to migrate from CSV to Drupal 8. So those are like the most used ones. And we can write our own if we have a like special need or something like that. We can write our own source plugin too. For process plugins, we have some of them already. These come with core, with the Migrate API and core, and some others get added through the additional contributed modules. But what we can do with the process plugins are like different data transformations. For example, we can concatenate values or strings. We can use also default value plugin to set always a value for a field that we want through all of our nodes that are going to be migrated. And so these are like the officially supported process plugins. And of course, we can write our own process plugin, which we're going to be doing as part of the demo in this session. Another tool that I usually recommend is to use a Drupal console. It's a great tool. If you are developing for Drupal 8 and you are not using it, you should. Drupal console does not support, as of right now, commands to migrate. However, they're going to be added for the stable release for Drupal console. So it will be interesting to see the differences between performing migrations between Drupal console and Drush. I know that Jesus is working on this part too. But what we're going to be using it is for creating our modules and creating our plugins that we might need for our migration. and Symfony console. So Symfony console is actually the seed for Drupal console. This is where they took like the base of the commands and the behavior that we have now for Drupal console. There are a lot of similarities. This is not needed for every migration project, but since the demo that I'm going to be performing right now is based on a Symfony application that is non-Drupal, I'm going to be using it, and since I've been using it for Drupal, you by default kind of know how to use the Symfony console as well, because a lot of the commands are very alike. So the Symfony console I have, as you can see, looks very similar to Drupal console. This is just like the list or the default help from the Symfony console. It gets also installed like Drupal console as a per project basis, so you don't have like a global installer for this. It comes as part of your Symfony application. So let's get started with our mini migration here. So we're going to be installing what they call like a Symfony demo application, which is basically a demo that the Symfony guys made to show you how to do, or the best way to do applications in Symfony. So the example that they have is a blog application that has some content already in there, like randomly generated content. And that is the content that we are going to be migrating to Drupal 8. So what we need to do is first install Symfony. These are like the instructions that are on the Symfony webpage. So you just get the installer and install it. And to create the Symfony demo application, you just run Symfony demo. That is the command to execute the application. So basically what it's going to be doing is downloading the application and installing it on our system. So depending on how are you setting up your environment, you will also need to do a couple extra things. In this case, I'm using Drupal VM to virtualize my environment. So both my Symfony application and my Drupal application live in the same Drupal VM instance. So there's a little bit more of work to do there depending on your local setup or on the setup that you're going to be performing the migration. But for this example, we're using Drupal VM. So this is what the Symfony blog application looks like. I can show you here. So this will be the content that we are going to be migrating to Drupal 8. So as you can see, it's a very simple application. If I click a blog post, I'm going to see the content. It has some extra things that we're not going to be migrating in this session, like tags and comments. This could be migrated to Drupal, but I think that it will take a little bit more time, and I don't think I would be able to fit up all in one presentation. So the only thing that we're going to be migrating here is just the content of the blogs here. So this is, if you see the URL, I'm running this locally here. So and I just installed it with the commands that you just saw. So let me go back to my presentation. So this is very similar to Drupal console. So since Drupal 8 is also is based on Symfony, we do have controllers and we do have all those same concepts. So using the same command actually that we would use in Drupal console, we can generate any controller for our Symfony application. So right now, the Symfony application, the demo blog, it only shows you the list and the blocks as HTML. But what I want to do is I want to have them exposed as JSON or as something that I can tell Drupal, go and grab this so we can migrate it. So there is no configuration out of the box for this demo application to do that. So what I'm going to do is kind of hack it a little bit to expose those content as JSON. So I'm going to run that command, which is a generate controller on the Symfony application. This will do a very similar set of questions as if we were doing this with Drupal console. It's a little bit different because we have like bundle names here, but it's kind of like the only thing. So this will generate our like scaffolding code for our controller that we are going to be using to expose those blog posts as JSON. So this is basically what I'm doing here. The first time that I started working on this and trying to expose this information, I took a look at the code of the Symfony demo, and I saw that the post entity was not being serialized. There was no way to do it. So what I did at first was implement this interface, which is called JSON serializable. Try to return the properties of that object as JSON in a JSON response using Symfony. And it worked, but there are other elements like the comments and the tags that were not getting serialized correctly because of the structure that they have and their collections. So this method was just working like halfway, so I started researching a better way of doing this without having to hack too much of the classes and all that. And I found this bundle. It's a Symfony bundle that you can install. It's not part of Symfony by default, but you can add it with Composer. So the instructions are on that page. It's very easy to set up. What this bundle does is it serializes objects without having to implement any extra interfaces or anything like that. So it's very easy to use. So I went there and installed it. So this is how my JSON block controller class looks like. So basically what I'm doing there is getting all the posts with that method. That method was already written on the application. I just kind of copy it just to get all the posts. I am serializing it using this new bundle that I just installed on my Symfony application. I am setting the header as an application JSON, and I'm returning that response. So I'm basically doing the same thing that the Symfony application is doing, but instead of just returning it as a response to get rendered through a Twig template, I'm just sending it as a JSON serialized object. If I go to my new route, I am going to see this. So this is all the data of that application, all those posts being exposed as JSON. So it doesn't look that good because I don't have any plugins installed in my browser, but I usually have Postman, which is like a client to do like a REST API and requests to that. So you can see how that bundle is structuring the objects and the list that I need. So now that I have this, I can start using that to map to my fields in Drupal and actually performing the migration using like an API. It's not a full API, but it's kind of like an endpoint that we have now there on the Symfony application. If you see the URL on the get is the same URL that you just saw on the demo. It's just a different path, but it is the same server. So I'm going to start installing Drupal using Drupal Composer. So this is like the default or the best or the most supported way of installing Drupal now using the Drupal Composer project. It's basically running that command, and that command will get all the dependencies that we need for Drupal to run. The only other extra thing that I don't have like a GIF or a video for you here to see is just installing Drupal. But after doing this, you can just go to the web page and install Drupal as you would install it just regularly. So the other thing that we might need is a content type. Where are we going to put all this information from our endpoint or from our API? So I just created a very basic content type that I called Symfony blog post. And I only have one field because I'm only migrating the content right now. So it's not the only thing that gets migrated, because we have other fields in Drupal that are not exposed there, like the title and the date. And there are a few others that are there, you just don't explicitly add them through Drupal UI. So those are important too. And we're going to see on our YAML configuration how they look like. So after I have installed Drupal and I've created my content type, the next thing that I need to do is install the Migrate module that comes with core. So it is just running this command. I'm using Drupal console here to install the Migrate module. And I am also getting the Migrate Plus and the Migrate Tools contributed modules with Composer and installing them with Drupal console. So now that I have all that basic setup, I need to create a new module that will be enabled to actually perform the migration. So I'm also doing that with Drupal console with this command generate module, which will basically ask me some questions, some extra questions. I can set up a lot of flags there, like the module name, the machine name, but it will still ask me some questions. If I want that as a feature, we have dependencies. We could list the migrate modules as dependencies, which is something that it would be correct. I didn't do it because I'm just doing this for this project. So that would give me the folder structure and the file structure that I need to start working on the migration. So right now, there is no command to generate like a base migrate YAML file. It's something that I talked to Jesus about, so we might be adding that function to Drupal console in the near future, but it's not there right now. So we need to create our folder structure for this to work. So this is mandatory, the way in which the folders get structured, and the naming of our YAML file that will perform the migration, it needs to be prefixed by migrateplus.migration.the ID of the migration.yaml. And it needs to live inside of the config install, because at the end it's just a configuration file that we're going to be using. So another catch here is that if you're working on your migration and you need to change your YAML file, since this is loaded to the configuration in Drupal 8, the only way to get your changes to be recognized by Drupal is uninstalling your module and reinstalling your module again. So it's kind of like a little bit painful for that, but that's the way that the migration works right now. So this is the start of our YAML file. This is the first part of the file. So if you see there is a key there that is called ID, that is the ID of our migration. Everything else is our source. So for this example, I'm just telling it. So my source is going to be a URL. I'm using a plugin that is called URL that comes with Migrate Plus. The fetcher and the parser is HTTP JSON. And the URL that I'm going to be using for this is this one. That is the URL that you just saw of the application. So the item selector here, it is called data. And this comes from the actual JSON response. So if you see the response that I got, and this is something that I did because this is kind of standard in JSON responses to have some sort of a name for your array of objects in JSON. So sometimes it's called results, sometimes it's called data, so it varies. So I just called it like something standard. This is basically our source part for the migration. This is all that we have to do to tell Drupal we're going to be performing a migration from a URL or with a JSON file. Then we need to map those fields from the source and give them a name. And this selector, I am using the same here, but you can name them differently. This also can help you when errors occur. You will see those names as part of your errors sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes. So the only thing that we're doing here is go and grab these fields from the JSON. These are the ones that I'm going to be using to perform the migration. There is an extra key there that's IDs. This is also like standard, so I'm going to be using the ID that I have on the JSON to be like the IDs of the items for the migration. The destination part is very simple. In this case, it's only a node. We're only going to be migrating to nodes, and nodes are entities. You also can do here taxonomy terms. You can do even blocks. Pretty much everything that is an entity, you can migrate to using the Migrate API. And the process part of this. So this is where the actual mapping between what we set up on our source and the name of our fields happen. So if you see you can see the names of the fields. There are some hidden fields that Drupal does not expose by default, like lang code, the type of the node, also the content type, the title. And title is very important because if you don't set it up here, you will find an error because you cannot create a node in Drupal without a title. So title is mandatory for migrations as well. And we also have creator and change, which are also like hidden fields in Drupal. And the user ID, so who created that content. Sometimes you can even create a user that is called migrator or something like that and assign it to, so you would know who created those. Right now I'm using just the admin user. Another important part here. So if you see the JSON response, I do have like a standard date format. Here. So if you see this format, it is like a date with a time, but Drupal requires this to be a timestamp for the created and changed. So this is the first time that I said, well, I might need something extra that is not part of the official process plugins. So I decided to create one. And it was very simple using Drupal console. So I'm going to create a new process plugin to transform the data because Drupal needs it in a certain way. I'm running a command, Drupal generate plugin migrate process. It will take you to a series of questions like which module should this plugin leave. So I'm doing migrate from Symfony, which is the name of the module that I created to perform the migration. I'm going to give it a class name. This case is date to time or timestamp, like something like that. Yeah. The plugin ID is very important. This is what you actually paste into the YAML file. This is the key that will allow the YAML file to know which plugin are you or should you be using for that field specifically. And this is how it looks like. This is my plugin to transform a date to a timestamp. So you see it's very simple. The only thing I'm doing is getting the value and convert it to a string to time and return that. So when I return that, the migrate process will take that new format and put it in there. And I think I left some debug code there, so when I perform the migration, you're going to see the transformation for the dates. So let's see if all this works. So what I have right now installed is what you just saw. I have the modules, I have everything installed. So let's see how all these work. So I have my Symfony application running, as you just saw, and I do have a new, freshly installed Drupal site. It has no content here, it has nothing yet. So let's open our terminal. I'm here, right here. I am on the path. This is my the root, the doc root for my Drupal application. So if I run a Drush migrate status, I'm not going to see anything because I haven't installed the module that I just created. So I'm going to install it. This module has the same YAML that you just saw on the slides, so it is the same module. And if I run it, Drush migrate status, I should see yes. So there it is. Now that I have a YAML on the configuration, I can see. So if you take a look at there, it says maybe it's not big enough. Let me do this so we can see better. So if you see there. It says like total imported and unprocessed. So I have a total of 30 posts that come from the API from the Symfony application, and I haven't processed any of those. So what I can do right now is with the ID that I have here is actually perform the migration with the Drush command. So it's Drush migrate and the ID of the migration. This is like the debug code that I left there, so you could see how am I converting the dates into timestamps. So Drupal would take them and sort them by the last modified. So I am preserving the actual dates that the original posts had, which is something that is very common on migrations. That you preserve like dates, paths, and you can all do that. You can do all that with the Migrate API. So now that all the content has been migrated, I can go and see if that is true. So if I refresh, there it is. So if you take a look, I'm preserving also the order, because these are ordered by date. So Slaughter ipsum, Silva de secundus, and if you see it's the same order. If I click the content, I should see the same content that I have here.
So I have a question.
Yes.
For the user, it went to admin, goes to gender. How do you do command?
So the question is about the user. So if you remember on the slides when I was setting the actual, and actually we can see it right here. So if you take a look at these lines, I don't know if it's big enough. This is where you set the users that you want to be attached to that content. So in order to have the same users, I should have migrated the users first and then make the references on the actual content. So since the users are being also exposed on the JSON, you can take that and search for that user on Drupal, get the UID and set it here. So that is like an extra step. That's why we didn't migrate users or taxonomy terms or comments. But you need to do, when you do migrations with everything, there's like a certain order in which you can do stuff. But this is how you would do it. So right now, the user one is admin. So since this was only a demo, I just used that one. But this is where that is coming from. No problem. All right, so let me go back to my. I have a bonus demo. So you can rule the galaxy with this new power, which means you don't necessarily have to have some legacy system to migrate content to Drupal. You can use pretty much any API that is out there. And let's see what else is here. So I do have an extra hidden module that I prepared for this presentation. It's called Star Wars Migrate. So what this module does is it goes to the Star Wars API. I think it's called swappy.co. And I'm getting all the characters that are being, all the Star Wars characters that are being exposed on that API. And I'm migrating those as node entities for my site because I want to do something cool with them. So if I hit Drush migrate status, now that I have this new module enabled, I should see another group and another migrate ID, depending on how fast the connection is. So there it is. If you see here, I have a new group that's called Star Wars and a new migrate ID that is called Star Wars characters. So there are 87, a total of 87 characters that the API is giving me. So let's try it out. So if I try to import that, might take a little bit. So there it is, processed, 87 items, 87 created. Let's see if that's true on our site. So if I go to the home page, I should see a lot of Star Wars characters with some attributes that the API is also exposing. Right, so it is a very cool, like I told you, it's very powerful. You can do a lot of things with it. This is obviously another content type that I created for this. It's not the same content type, but what I wanted to emphasize about this is that you can have several sources that are just out there and migrate them into even the same content type. It doesn't have to be two separate content types. You can do it on the same one. And you can also do multilingual translation, migrations. It's a little, there are a couple of gotchas there, but I've done that, and it's something that can be done. It's just an extra configuration on the YAML files. But it is powerful and it's fun. So everything that is out there, you can just take it, make it Drupal, and do something cool with it. So, are there any questions?
Do you have any recommendations on how to handle files and images?
So the question is if there are any recommendations in regard to handling files and images. So there is support on Drupal, on the Migrate API support that kind of entities as well. So you would have to be migrating those to different entities. And my recommendation would be just follow what the actual Migrate API suggests. I haven't done that yet, but I know that those are supported as part of the Migrate API. So there is a way to handle all that. And it can get a little bit trickier because of the way it depends on where are you getting those from. If you are getting those from an API, the process would be very similar to this one. You just need your destination plugin would be a file entity instead of a node. And then you make the references from the nodes to that image or to that entity. If you're using media entity, you could also be using just the out-of-the-box way of Drupal to handle images, and that would work too. Yeah.
Do you have any experience pulling from an flat file Oracle database and doing updates for change data?
Yeah, so the question is if I have experience doing it from Oracle. The answer is no. But I had a similar case where I had to decide between syncing the data that I had already migrated to somewhere else where it was maintained. And the decision I took for that particular project was pretty much do a bodiless Drupal for that part. So I am getting that data from an API, which it actually gets the data from a database. It's a Microsoft SQL database. So the information is being getting from there, exposed on an API. And for that part, my suggestion would be if you are not going to manage your data in Drupal, then it's probably not a good idea to do the synchronization. It would be better if you just grab it from wherever it's being managed and just display it on Drupal. And you can do that using just controllers and tree templates to render that information. So you would have like the most updated information that is coming from the API on your Drupal system, and not having to deal with the synchronization, which you could do too, but it's a little bit more complex, and you can potentially have like that logs and stuff like that. So that's what I did on that particular problem that I had. Any other question? Mm-hmm.
How do you deal with references to content that you're pulling in from a source? So with the Star Wars example, maybe friends of the characters and it referencing the ID and the source?
Yeah, that is a very good question. So actually, when you query the Star Wars API, it would only give you a certain amount of characters. It wouldn't give you the 87 that you just saw. So what a lot of API do is they have like a link for the next page, which would be like a reference. And I don't know the exact reason, but I took a look at the code of the HTTP plugin for parsing, and all those sections are commented out on the plugin, on the Migrate Plus module. It is there, and I read through the code. Oh, this is just to handle those next and those references to that. So it is out right now. So what you could do that is to write your process plugins, and whenever you see that, whenever you get a URL or you know that that field has an URL, you can just process it and grab the information and put it there. If you
actually, my question wasn't about kind of pagination through the API, but rather references to other content through the API.
Entity relationships.
Yeah, so if Jar Jar Binks is friends with Luke Skywalker, and there's a reference, in the source data to that other entity.
You could do that with the IDs. So as part of the migration, you could set the IDs of the nodes that you want to set there. So if you already know those relationships beforehand, as part of your endpoint, you can list them there. And when you are migrating, you can have like an entity reference field on Drupal and set the actual entity of that other object or that other node to be there, and those would be related, or you would have the relationships like that too.
So there's some way to convert from the source ID to the Drupal entity ID?
You could use the same, and if you want to convert them, you could use a process plugin to do that. Any other question?
Just a comment, you mentioned about having to reinstall the migration when you make updates. You can do a config import and pass it, say it's a partial import, and if you put the path to the source of your files, your YAML files for the migration, then it'll just pull those in. So you don't have to completely uninstall or reinstall. It just is like one Drush command, and it'll re-import just that configuration.
Awesome, thank you. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you very much for coming to my presentation. So there are some links there. That QR code, if you scan it, it will take you to a blog post that is on our webpage. So if you want to get the slides, or we will be putting the video up there too. And if you don't have anything to read the QR code, you can just go to the Vixel website, vixel.com, and go to the blog section, and you'll find it there too. Thank you. Thank you very much.